One thing I've said often is that the only time you stop learning is when you die. So that being said, you have to always learn about what new ways to introduce your business and talk about what you do. One of the failures I think founders do often is that they do just that. They talk about their business too much. Businesses are run by humans. Talk about yourself and talk about the area that you're in.
Well, welcome back. We're having a great time doing interviews behind the stage at Investment Week in Los Angeles this year. And we've got another great steward, Taj, a local investor and a serial entrepreneur. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you got up.
First, thank you so much for having me here.
Of course.
I'm Dr. Taj Ajmad Eldridge, and I often say I wear many hats in climate tech as an investor. I own a fund of funds called Include Ventures, where we invest in other venture funds that in turn invest in startups. And then I also manage capital from a company called Jobs for the Future, where I direct their climate innovations, focusing on jobs for the future, which is climate. And I'm happy that I gave capital to an organization called Green Careers Dallas to focus on careers in Dallas around climate.
There we go, there we go. See, local Dallas native, also enjoying the great fruits of the world, California and Dallas these days, and everywhere else, just flying in from Dubai.
Absolutely.
So, when it comes to the fund of fund, I know many people haven't kind of talked to us about that. What does that traditionally look like? Are you helping new funds start or investing in the funds that are already historic?
Yeah, great question. I think the thing that founders fail to do is that they fail to wonder, how do the investors get their money? Because a lot of times the investors are doing the same thing founders are doing. They're fundraising, they're doing some of the same things and same strategies. And I say that because as a founder, you can learn a lot from your own fundraising by seeing how your investor fundraise themselves. So they get money from corporations, they get money from foundations, and they get money from organizations like us, which is a fund of funds. We in turn charge our investors, which are pension funds, large corporations who don't want to do smaller checks, to get invest into their funds. And so they're paying us a fee, and then they're paying the funds we invest in a fee. So that means we have to be very particular about the funds that we select to ensure they're going to give us a maximum return, because our investors are paying double. And they're paying double because of our expertise, our knowledge of the market, and the way that we can have great diligence on the funds that are doing the most impactful things.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. Of course, I think sometimes entrepreneurs, because they're so excited, they're really focused on their skill set, and what you said is very valuable. Learning from your investors themselves could bring a new value set from them, right?
Absolutely. I think one thing I've said often is that the only time you stop learning is when you die. So that being said, you have to always learn about what new ways to introduce your business and talk about what you do. One of the failures I think founders do often is that they do just that. They talk about their business too much. Businesses are run by humans. Talk about yourself and talk about the area that you're in. When I was a founder, one of the things I did, I talked about the subject matter my company was in. So it was bigger than just my company. Sure. And so that way I talked about my competitors, people in the market, people who failed, people who succeeded, and then looked at me as a subject matter expert. And so I think from that standpoint, it's a different conversation that you have with investors when you're an SME versus just a startup company.
Absolutely. Well, they say they trust the teacher, right?
Absolutely.
So it never hurts to be an expert in your field of what you're doing. Now, how did climate technology or climate utility and employment kind of come to be as a part of your passion?
I love that question, because given that both you live in Dallas, I'm from Dallas, it came because I grew up, and for the listeners, if they're from Dallas, I grew up in Oak Cliff, so probably would know about that if you're from Dallas. The problem that we have in a lot of communities of Oak Cliff, by the time of the early 80s, I'm nearly 50, there's a lot of segregation. Most people live in the southern part of Dallas, of course, and we had a lot of lead in our pipes. We had a lot of water runoff from agriculture, and I got kidney failure from that, me and 3 other of my cousins. They all passed, and I was the last one living. That could have been prevented by sustainable practices on ways we even build our infrastructure. So that was my first catalyst to get into climate, more about our communities of color, communities that are poor communities that are immigrant communities. But the real way I got into climate was that I was an investor in a fashion company. And this is probably about 15 years ago. And I realized the connection between climate, sustainability, and fashion. Most people don't know is that when we talk about climate and greenhouse gas emissions, most people say, oh, flying an airplane is bad, or driving gas-powered vehicles are bad. But people don't realize fashion has more greenhouse gas emissions than aviation and shipping combined.
Wow.
From the way we make it, to the way we consume it, the way we dispose it, right? Because a lot of people don't realize that, you know, look like we're around the same age. Our grandparents' closet was way smaller than ours, right? But we have a lot of items in our closet, right? People ask me today, you know, how many suits you have? But they don't realize I'm wearing the same thing, just different shirts.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's one thing that people have to realize is that climate impacts us all, no matter what sector we're in.
That's
if
right.
we're in AI, we're in consumer, we're in health, climate will impact what you're doing. And so that's why I want to be in this space, because communities that look like me are being impacted the most.
Excellent. Well, I am a firm believer in learning new things, and you just gave us something new right there with how our natural clothes kind of impact that climate change. Love that. So, how would startups or entrepreneurs work with you, kind of in the capacity that you're in today?
Yeah, as I mentioned about this idea of never stop learning, I still learn. I love to talk to founders. The reason I was in Dubai, as you mentioned, was of this founder conference where I was meeting founders from all over the world and think about the ways that they want to do their businesses, how they're impacting their communities and their countries. But I think for a person like me as a fund of funds, founders should understand that fund of funds, we don't typically invest in startup companies. Our funds do, but for me, it's always good for me to understand what's happening in the climate space. So I'm always interested in knowing the founders that are out there.
Sure.
A lot of times we connect on LinkedIn, which is a great place for founders to really kind of capture a lot of this stuff, or on social media, from Twitter and the like. One thing I would say though, for founders, if you're thinking about ways to see who's in the marketplace, there's a tool called signal.nfx.com. The tool is great because one of the things you don't want to do is you don't want to have all this time that you're wasting with an investor to only realize they don't invest in your sector.
That's right.
So I have so many people come
mandate.
to me and say, hey, I have a beauty company. And I'm a climate person. Unless you can show me the connection, because I can see the connection. But if you don't see it, then we shouldn't talk. But I think that there is, again, there's this idea of network, because I think when I first was a founder, I was a founder to begin with in the early 2000s, there wasn't a lot of people who looked like me as investors. But the interesting thing is the same thing we're talking about now with the lack of funding for women and people of color, the same conversation happened 20 years ago.
That's right.
And so I think one of the things that we have to do is build this community. So for me, when I'm talking to founders, it's about community building as opposed to thinking about investments. And the last thing I would say for other founders is that if you haven't heard this, if you want fundraising, you ask for advice. If you want advice, you ask an investor for fundraising. So kind of think about it from that standpoint.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, Taj, how would a person reach out or get connected with you if they thought that would be helpful?
Absolutely. I think, again, the best way is to connect with me on LinkedIn, and it's my full name, Taj Ajmad Eldridge, Ahmad Eldridge, Eldridge. And I love to say this because I think at this age, I don't have gray because I color, but I feel like I'm an OG, and OGs to offer game. But let me explain to the founders what game really means for me.
Sure.
It means guidance, attention, motivation, and education. So when you do connect with me, those 4 things would be part of the process, because I'm getting that also from you, because true OGs continue to learn.
That's right.
Yes, sir.
Well, come and get some more game from Taj and check us out even further in Investment Week this year. Thanks, my brother.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Yes, sir.